I'm Diane O'Connor, and in this series, we will hear from MBSRT members who have retired and have gone on to their next chapter following their dreams. We will meet people who have taken the leap and have gone on to have great adventures and wonderful life experiences. Our dreamcatcher today is well-known author Susan White. Susan was born in New Brunswick, and as a teenager, her family moved to the Kingston Peninsula, with her only leaving long enough to earn her BA and BEd at St. Thomas University in Fredericton. She returned to the Kingston Peninsula, where she taught elementary school while raising 4 children and running a small farm with her husband. She retired early to concentrate on her writing and is the author of 14 books, including adult novels as well as middle grade novels, and was a contributor to the Anne of Green Gables anthology. Susan received the Anne Connor Brymer Award for her novel, The Year Mrs. Montague Cried. She is working currently on a novel about wartime houses built in 1947 in Moncton, with the working title, If These Walls. Welcome to Dreamcatcher, Susan.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
When we spoke recently, you talked about trying your hand at writing on weekends and school holidays, and we know as teachers how hard that can be. So it sounds like you had the urge to write long before you actually wrote your first novel. Did you always want to be a writer?
Yes, I think so. And I do. I always envy the people that can write at night, can take 10 minutes and do some writing. I always say maybe that was more a men's privilege than a women's, because when we get home, of course, we have laundry to do and meals to make and all that sort of thing. But yes, I always had that in the back of my mind, and it definitely, stayed with me long enough for me to actually do something about it.
Yeah, yeah, and as you say, you couldn't do it on weekends and school holidays because we know as teachers we always had marking to do and everything else. So writing is a big deal in itself, and being a writer, of course, and you had your own method of writing and your own process, all right. And it usually starts with an idea, and you've said that you usually know the title before you write the book, which is very interesting. Family and relationships seem to play a big part in many of your novels. So, where do your ideas actually come from, and how do you start? Because a blank page, wow, that seems pretty daunting to me.
A blank page is very daunting. And right now I'm kind of dealing with that. I've actually got 3 books on the go. The one that you mentioned, which I think I'm up to about 150 pages into, one that I started a few years ago that I've got a few pages written, and one that just came to me a week ago that I've got 20 pages written. So it is daunting, but I always remind myself that every book has that starting point, and you have to just keep going at it until it finds you, really. I find really that the stories find me once I show up and get them started. So I'm thankful for that process, but it also is very, very daunting by times.
Mm, I could imagine. Yes. Well, I've read a lot of your blog entries, which are just like a novel themselves. It's almost like a memoir. And I see that nature, and in particular, a certain lake, has a deep meaning for you. And in your book, Waiting for Still Water, that lake plays a vital role. So, was that lake an inspiration for your writing in this instance?
Absolutely. The lake, I'm a swimmer. I love to swim. I find a lot of healing and a lot of solace in the water. I grew up on the St. John River, and I said once I married, I kind of gave up the river and then adopted the lake. We moved on to what's called the Walton Lake Road, and the lake became a big part of my life. I did a school visit once. I remember this story. It was funny because it was a grade 1 class, and I said that the river's in this book, and the lake is in this book, and the river's in this book, and the lake is in this book. And a little boy put up his hand and he said, "How did you get the water into the book?" And I laughed because, of course, he was taking it very literally. But I do find that most of my books had have a swimming element, or a lake, or the lake, my lake, or the river. And it's just part of who I am, I guess. And I bring that to the page.
Hmm. Yes, yes. And I know you spend a lot of time in nature. Well, of course, running a farm, you'd be in nature anyway, but there's a particular road that you used to walk on a lot as well. And maybe your inspiration comes from some of those walks.
Oh, absolutely. We have what's called the Wood Road Walk. The Wood Road, we call it the route, but we have 100 acres, and my husband cuts wood, firewood, and also cut pulpwood for many years and that sort of thing, and logs. And there's a beautiful long road that he's made to do that enterprise, and I would walk it every season of the year, except probably June or July and August, when I would spend more time in the lake because the bugs would be so bad on the wood road. But I would walk it, I would snowshoe it. It comes to the top of a hill and a beautiful, beautiful area. And I got a lot of inspiration, just a lot of personal inspiration, and then often came up with ideas for my writing on those walks. And yeah, and snowshoeing was, because then you can go anywhere. When we have snow like we do now, you can, go just about anywhere in the woods. Don't have to necessarily be on a trail or on the road.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, I mean we do have some wonderful trails and walkways in New Brunswick, and especially in the Kennebecasis Valley, with lots of wonderful trails and places to
Mhm,
walk. And of course,
mhm.
nature is always a great inspiration for a lot of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you spend a lot of time in schools, as you were saying about this one child asking about the water in your books.
Mhm.
So I imagine you've had lots of interesting questions, especially from some of these aspiring young writers.
Absolutely. My first book was published in 2011, and then I went on to win the Anne Connor Primer in 2012. And I started, I think, around 2012 doing Writers in the School program through the New Brunswick Writing Federation, and did a lot of school visits. Probably did about one a month for several years. And then COVID kind of, put the kibosh on that. I did a few Zoom visits, which aren't the same, although I enjoyed them and when I did them. And I loved that. I loved being in the school in the different grade levels. I always say kindergarten and grade 9 were the most challenging
Oh,
because
really?
I think kindergartners and grade 9 kids sometimes are too wrapped up in their own lives to care about anybody else's. But they also had gifts as well. And oh, I had so many wonderful, wonderful questions over the years, and have documented them and remembered them. And I miss that, although they're exhausting because you go and you show up and you're there from the first bell in the morning to the last bell in the afternoon. Often did writers workshops in the afternoon with kids that were really interested and really, very gifted in their writing and their imagination, and I enjoyed that. I did the TD Canadian Children's Book Tour in 2015 and presented to over 800 kids in the Ottawa, Toronto area, and that was an experience, a wonderful
Wow.
experience. But I'm kind of tired these days, and sometimes I think I'm just as glad that they kind of fizzled out. I mean, I have maybe one or two a year now, as opposed to one or two a month previously. But a gift, and kids really, they're right there, and they're very receptive. If I give something of myself, I always get something back from those kids, and I'm thankful for that.
Yes, for sure. Kids are wonderful. And I mean, we're promoting literacy all the time. And what better way to promote literacy than to listen to an author and talk about the whole writing process,
Right.
getting these young children to think about, well, writing is more than just putting a pen on paper and writing a few words. There's a lot more to it. And they, of course, would want to know all of that. And that brings me to my next question of, you can put the pen to paper, but there's more than just writing some sentences or even writing a chapter. So there's all the hard work of editing and getting the book launched and going to writers' workshops and even award ceremonies. So what's that like, the things behind the scenes that people don't realize about becoming an author?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Diane, because, and in schools, I would say, when your teacher says you've got to fix this, or you've got to fix that, or you've got to change that, or add something here, or take away something there, that's what an editor does. And an editor is really priceless in the whole process, because you've got to trust your editor. I've had the same editor, I think, for the last 10 books, and she knows me very well, and really brings a lot out in my writing. But it's a long slog, and the idea and getting the first draft done is just really the very, very beginning of the whole process. And even after it's all done, I remember going to a reading that the author Joan Clark did years ago. And she always, when she did a reading, she's passed away, but when she did a reading, she had a pen with her and she would change things in her published book while she was reading it. And I at the time I remember thinking that was so odd, but I understand it now and think, oh, I would have changed that paragraph if I could change it now. But it's to get that through to kids how important it is to trust somebody else's opinion of your work. You know, you've got to stand true to what you really want to tell and how you want to tell it. But if someone says, you know, I don't get that, or maybe you could, you know, tell me more about that character, those are things you should listen to, because it makes my editor makes me a better writer, you know, in by far. But also it's I like that part of that process as well. When I get edits back from my editor and she asks me to change something or to, you know, embellish on a character or even take a character out, then I
Oh,
like that process, because
oh,
I know I'm telling the story better than I started telling it, you know, and
uh,
that's all part of it. Which
oh,
which is anything. I say, you know, if you're a skater, you're going to, you know, the more you do, the better you're going to get at doing that. But you
mhm.
also have to take advice from coaches and from, you know, to learn and to become better at whatever it is you're trying to do.
Mm, very true. You know, I would think that some people, if they're writing their first novel and they get the editing back and they think, oh, they want me to take that character out, would they be offended maybe, you know, the
Yes.
first time? But you get used to that. And as
Well,
you say,
yes.
it's good
And it's a
advice.
learning curve. I remember with my first book, I was asked to take 2,100 words out. 21, I was get that wrong. Basically take 70 pages out of my first book.
Oh
And it was
my.
like, I can't do that. There's no way. But I
Yeah.
worked through that with my editor and learned so much, because I had to really, really scrutinize and really be very particular about how I was telling that story. And it
Mhm.
is hard. Like people that are in writing groups with other writers and don't like to take any criticism, or you know, want everyone to tell you that, oh, that's perfect and it's going to be a bestseller, it's going to be amazing, like
Mhm.
that. You There's so much more to learn about the craft of writing, and you
Oh,
have to be
exactly.
open to that. It's
Yes.
personal, and even when you
Yes.
let a book go out into the world, it's you know, you're letting a very personal thing go, and
Hmm.
people will like it, they'll love it, they'll hate it, they'll, you know, they'll read 10 pages and not read any more. There's, you know, you'll get all of those factors. And
Mm.
just like
Yeah.
if you pick up a book to read, you know, you're going to either love it or hate it, or you know, care about it or not care about it.
Hmm.
And your best friend might think the exact opposite. So you
Mm.
have to be, you know, you have to kind of get you know, realistic about it, but also not let, you know, your personal feelings, you know, not
Mm.
let it overcome you, I guess.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I'm going to go back to something we touched on earlier about the inspiration for your books. And as I've read a couple of your books already, and I've noticed that the setting for your books are very local. You know, I see St. John in them. I see the Kennebecasis Valley. I see, well, the Walton Lake and the
Yes,
Kingston Peninsula, all this, which was really interesting to me because I have never really read novels that are set where I live. And
yes,
I imagine that is quite interesting to a lot of people who would live here. But that was an interesting part for me to see something. And actually, when I'm reading it, there's a little Easter egg of, oh, I know that street, you know,
yes.
and I know where she's going with this. And so, what caused you to write in your own backyard?
Well, I guess because basically I started to write what I know about, what I care about, and I really care about the Kingston Peninsula. I moved here when I was in grade 7, and I was a huge Anna Green Gables fan, and sort of the part of her, you know, moving to Avonlea and all of a sudden having a home and a place to belong. That's where how I felt with the peninsula. So I that was a personal thing and a choice. Again, there's scrutiny involved because, you know, I can put an imaginary farm on the Walton Lake Road. And at my launch, I had somebody come up and say, you know, my husband said there was never a gray farm on the Walton Lake Road. Well, no, there wasn't, but I made it up and, that sort of thing. So you're kind of playing with, everybody knows their own reality or their own whatever, their own perception of the place. But also it's to me, I'm celebrating the place. I'm giving it the value that I think, and really I think a lot of authors do that. Sometimes they rename the place. They don't, actually use the
Hmm.
city or the town or the
Right.
countryside that they're writing about. But I always felt that I was, giving homage to the place that I love. But also, a few of my books are not set on the Kingston Peninsula. Fear of Drowning is set in the Thousand Islands, but I gave it a peninsula connection. I had one of the characters come be, from the Kingston Peninsula. But,
Hmm.
and some people choose, like I said, to mask that. They
Hmm.
might be writing about the street they grew up on, but they change it in so many ways that nobody could actually identify it. But so there is, I think both ways
Hmm.
there's credibility to both ways. But for me, I like the local aspect, and that does a lot of my readers like that as well. But I
Mm.
also think that readers, I have a woman that has read all my books from Ireland. Her friend picks them up every summer and sends her over one of my new books. And she
Ah,
doesn't know this area, but the
right.
stories still speak to her. So
Yeah.
I think
Oh,
that's
yeah.
a common thing that authors either, you know, put their own setting,
Yes,
personal setting
exactly.
into a book or not.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the story still speaks no matter what.
Yes,
It says something to everyone. Yeah, like I said, I wasn't used to reading something where I knew the location and recognized places. Most of the things I read are British detective novels, things like
right,
that,
right.
overseas. So it was
Yes,
brand new to me, but I really enjoyed them. And I especially liked The Right Retreat, which was set, I think, in Shediac.
and the Northumberland Strait, like on about Petty Camp, Petty
Yeah.
around that area. Yep, that
Yeah,
area.
yeah. And that was
Yes,
really interesting because then you were talking about people coming to actually go to a writer's workshop and things like that.
right,
So it was
right.
really interesting to see that. I
Hmm.
found that
Thank you.
really good. Yeah.
I enjoyed writing that one because I said it actually, my friend and that's her house, not her house like I made it up,
Yeah.
but her where her house is. And so the whole year I worked on that, I would like message her and like I'd say, send me a picture of the sunset, send me a picture. So I felt like I was there the whole time. and
Oh, nice.
and she loves it, of course, because it's, when she reads it, she sees her house and her
Right.
her area. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
just all that sort of thing. And it grounds you. It gives you a place to start, a place to
Yes.
be in, I think. But
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
And you've done lots of book launches and interviews and, as you say, workshops and going into schools. But what's a book launch actually like?
Well, I remember my first book launch, and I had it at the farmers market on the Kingston Peninsula for the year Mrs. Montague cried. And we had so many people that they were afraid to, the fire marshal, if the fire marshal came, they would have shut the place down and,
Oh,
and
wow.
cleared us out. There were
Yeah.
hundreds and overflow. There were people outside. And it was just so thrilling. I mean, the year Mrs. Montague cried was a personal story about the
Hmm.
loss of our oldest son, and the year I went back to teaching after we lost him. But I had students and colleagues and people I grew up with and people from far and wide, really, and relatives and friends. But it was such a celebration. So that
Hmm.
was the huge big one, and everything else as far as numbers and whatever and book sales and that sort of thing kind of fell short after that. But there
Yeah.
was always a special element to everyone. And then
Mhm.
COVID came along, so I had
Oh,
two book launches online, Zoom book launches, and kind of missed that, that physical aspect of it. And then with 14 books, I got to the point where it was like, oh, does anyone want to come to the next book launch? Like, it's just like, okay,
right.
we're going again. And she's got another book, blah, blah, blah. And so, they've all had their special elements. I just had one in December. We had actually canceled it because of the weather and had it the week after. And then the week after, we had no power on the peninsula and no power in Rosse. And I had so many people that said, oh, I would have come, but I hadn't been able to shower and blah, blah, blah. And so it was probably my smallest, but my friend introduced me, a former colleague, and for such Winter's Day, and his father had been the meat cutter at the Dominion store in King Square, and he's in the book, and so there's always that personal
Oh,
element,
yeah.
and it's thrilling for an author, even if you've got 10 people, sitting there celebrating. It's something to be celebrated because it is something, you've gone from the seed of an idea and you've brought it to fruition, and you're holding a physical book in your hand. So you
Mm.
launch it, you say, here we go, thank you for everything.
Exactly. Oh yeah, it's quite an accomplishment, and as you say, just writing the book itself and having it published is an accomplishment in itself. And then having
Mhm.
people come to say, "Well done," that's a
Yes,
really nice thing. And
yes,
even if it's just a few, that means a lot for sure.
that's right, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you said, I think in one of your blog entries, in the very beginning, your aim was to have 20 books in 20 years. Is that still on your
Yeah, at
mind?
that first big launch, I said to my son on the way home, my youngest son, I said, I'm going, I said, my goal is, a book a year for the next 20 years. And he said, "Oh, Mom, I thought you were just writing this one." And I said, "Oh, no, no, this has just opened the floodgates." So
Yeah.
I'm on schedule. In fact, I think I'm maybe a little bit ahead of schedule.
Hmm. Yeah.
But again, I'm thankful for what I've accomplished, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to keep doing it. And really, if I meet my goal, that's great. If I don't, I still did what I set out to do as far as get my first book done,
Hmm.
written and published, which
Hmm.
was, it's all good. So I'm thankful
Yes.
for it all.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Now, you retired from teaching a bit earlier than most people. You were very lucky, and you wanted to concentrate on your writing. So obviously, you had a plan. You knew what you were going to do. So, what advice would you give to anyone about to retire, or who is just retired and thinking, "Okay, what happens next?"
Right. That's a very good question too. I did have a very determined, particular plan. I had taken a deferred leave to write my first one, and then felt like if I retired before it was even published, so it was kind of like I didn't have that already, I've got, a published book, but I
Hmm.
thought if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it now. And so I think to anybody that's retiring, first of all, you look back at the contribution you've made in your profession. You walk away from it thinking I've done the best that I could with what I knew at the time, and what was, and let it go. But also, it defines us. But to think that really, the next step can continue to define us, and that some people choose to supply teach, or to tutor, or to do something that's educational related,
Hmm.
and that's all great. But whatever it is you decide to do, number one, think about what fills you up, what makes you happy, what makes and let go what you've already done,
Hmm.
and just see what that next horizon is, whether you
Hmm.
already know it or not.
Hmm.
Kind of whatever feeds you, whatever fills you up,
Hmm.
go for that, whether it's volunteer or whether it's going to be something. I'm not making a ton of money writing books, like you have to basically sell millions of copies to make millions of dollars,
Yes,
hundreds of
exactly.
copies, you make hundreds of dollars, and thousands,
Yeah.
and so on. But I'm thankful for a pension, so we do have that, and hopefully,
Yeah.
that'll continue to be solid, and give us what we need as far as finances. But do what makes you happy, what you love to
Yeah.
do, and look after yourself in that. We've given so much of ourselves over the years, so much of ourselves. People that aren't teachers don't realize how consuming it is,
Oh, yes.
during that school year. And
Yes.
and let that go, and know, yes, I've done a good job. Now move on and do something else that makes me happy.
Exactly, exactly. And I always tell friends, you retire from something to something else.
Do something
You know,
else.
and it's best to have a plan, think about it before you actually retire, and then try all kinds of things because,
Exactly.
it's unlimited what we can do. We have the time,
Exactly.
let's do it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And some people find retirement to be very daunting, and what will I sleep all day, that sort. But
Uh,
let those cycles go as well. Like if that first few months or first year of retirement is, you're sleeping until like till 10 o'clock in the morning, like
Yeah.
celebrate that because
Yeah.
you weren't able to do that, when you were working.
Exactly.
And so,
Exactly. Yeah, we think of all those snow days when we turned the radio
oh,
on.
I
We
still love
heard
a
no
snow day.
school.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Oh my
Yes.
gosh. Well, thank you so much for being our guest today in
Oh,
Dreamcatcher, Susan.
well,
And best
thank
of
you.
luck to you with your next novel and many more, I'm sure, that you
Thank you.
have in your head.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess, I'll do it till I can't do it anymore. So I thank you
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
much for inviting me. And this is great what you do. I think it's a wonderful celebration of what we have to offer.
Yes. Well, thank you again. And I'm sure that a lot of folks will take your advice to heart as they enter their next chapter following their dreams.
Thank you.